My name's Mark. I'm 35, and until a few months ago, I was just surviving, working a dead-end job at a warehouse, barely making enough to cover rent, and the mounting bills that seemed to multiply like rabbits. My wife, let's call her Evelyn, worked part-time as a barista. We weren't rich. We struggled together and dreamed about the life we wanted. Evelyn, we'd been together for 8 years, married for 5. I loved her, or at least I thought I did. We'd been through thick and thin, layoffs, car troubles, family emergencies. We always had each other's backs, or so I thought. But it turns out, money can do strange things to people. Things I never saw coming. It all started on a Tuesday night. Evelyn, like she did every week, had bought a lottery ticket. It was her little ritual, a way to inject a tiny bit of hope into our otherwise mundane existence. I never really paid much attention. I figured it was a waste of money, but hey, it made her happy. I remember that particular night vividly. I was sprawled on the couch, half-heartedly watching some baseball game, nursing a lukewarm beer. Evelyn was flipping through channels, muttering about how there was nothing good on. Then she started checking the lottery numbers on her phone. This she does every week, and I usually hear, "Oh, it was off by 1 number," or "next time for sure." "Burn it," she would say, rolling her eyes. "And if I win, you'll be singing a different tune." It was one of our inside jokes, a way of seeing if we could win or not. But this night was different. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a scream. Not just a normal scream. This was a blood-curdling, high-pitched shriek that sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my system. I swear my heart stopped for a beat. "What the hell?" I yelled, practically leaping off the couch. I knocked over my beer in the process, the dark liquid spreading across the carpet. "Evelyn, what happened?" She was standing frozen in the middle of the living room, staring at her phone, her face as white as a sheet. Her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely hold the device. I won," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. I figured she was just surprised because of the numbers lining up. "What?" I asked, incredulous. "You won what?" She shoved the lottery ticket and her phone into my face, her hands trembling violently. "I freaking won! Look!" I squinted at the screen. The numbers on the TV matched the ones on her ticket. I read it over and over again. First, I thought it was thousands of dollars, but then I looked again. Millions! $9 million! I choked out, my throat suddenly dry. No way. Evelyn snatched the ticket back, clutching it to her chest like it was a priceless artifact. "This isn't happening," she kept repeating, her voice a mix of disbelief and something else I couldn't quite decipher. This isn't real, but it was real. The shock hit me all at once, a tidal wave of disbelief, excitement, and a strange sense of relief. For years, we had struggled, living paycheck to paycheck, drowning in debt, stressing over every single expense. We were trapped in the same soul-crushing cycle, with no way out. But now everything had changed. A grin spread across my face, so wide it hurt. "Evelyn, this is amazing. We're finally free. No more bills, no more stress." But she wasn't smiling. Instead, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Something cold, something calculating. "No," she said slowly, her eyes narrowed. "I'm free." I frowned, the first tendrils of unease creeping into my joy. "What do you mean? We're married." "This money changes everything for us." She let out a sharp, almost amused laugh. "Oh, do we?" "Because as far as I remember, I bought this ticket with my money." I blinked, the blood starting to drain from my face. "Evelyn, we've been together for years. Everything we have, we share." She smirked, standing up and stretching languidly, like a cat who'd just landed the catch of the day. "Well, maybe it's time we rethink that." My stomach twisted into knots. Something wasn't right. She was acting different. This wasn't the woman I had married. The Evelyn I knew would have been jumping for joy with me. planning trips, talking about paying off our debts, dreaming about the future together. But this Evelyn looked like she had just been handed a golden ticket out of our marriage. She tossed her hair over her shoulder, a gesture that usually made my heart flutter, but now just felt dismissive. She walked toward the bedroom. "I need to think," she said, her voice flat. "Think about what?" My voice was rising, panic beginning to set in. She paused at the door, her back to me, and gave me a long, unreadable look. About my future. Then she shut the door, leaving me standing there, heart pounding, mind racing. This wasn't just about money. This was about me, and I had a sinking feeling that my wife's newfound fortune had just made me disposable. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and confusion. Evelyn was glued to her phone, making calls, texting people, typing away on her laptop like she was plotting something big. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was short and dismissive, as if I was some annoying obstacle in her path. "I'm busy." She'd snap if I tried to talk to her about the future or what she was planning to do with the winnings. "Just give me space." I tried to ignore it. I told myself she was just overwhelmed. Winning $9 million overnight wasn't something you processed easily. Maybe she just needed time to adjust. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The joy I had initially felt had been replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. I felt like I was watching a stranger inhabit my wife's body. The warmth, the laughter, the shared dreams, they were all gone, replaced by a cold, calculating detachment. I tried to rekindle some kind of connection, some spark of the woman I loved. I brought her flowers, cooked her favorite meal, even suggested a weekend getaway. But nothing worked. She just brushed me off. Her eyes glazed over with a distant, almost contemptuous look. One evening, I found her staring out the window, a small smile playing on her lips. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She turned to me, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of the old Evelyn, but it was quickly gone. "Just thinking about possibilities," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Possibilities? Like what?" I pressed, desperate for any kind of reassurance. She shrugged, turning back to the window. "Things I never thought I could have." That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence between us, thick and suffocating. Evelyn was next to me, but she felt a million miles away. I tried to reach for her hand, but she flinched, pulling away. "I'm tired," she mumbled, turning her back to me. I closed my eyes, trying to fight back the tears that were welling up. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the life I wanted. And I had a feeling it was about to get a whole lot worse. Then, a week later, she dropped the bombshell. It was a Friday evening. I came home from work, expecting to see her in her usual spot on the couch, scrolling through her phone or watching some reality show. Instead, I found her standing by the dining table, a stack of papers in front of her. "We need to talk," she said, her voice eerily calm. I froze, my gut twisting. This wasn't going to be good. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "About what?" She took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly, like she had been rehearsing this moment for days. "I want a divorce." The words hit me like a truck. My ears rang, my vision blurred for a moment. I let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. "What?" Her face was stone cold, devoid of any emotion. "I want a divorce." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say she was kidding, that this was all some kind of sick joke. But there was none. "You're serious?" My voice cracked, betraying the panic that was rising inside me. She nodded, her eyes fixed on some point beyond me. "I've been thinking about this for a while, and winning the lottery, it just made things clear for me." "Clear?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Clear for who?" I took a step closer, trying to grasp her hand, trying to connect with the woman I thought I knew. "Evelyn, where is this coming from? We've been together for years. We built a life together. she sighed, looking at me like I was some annoying obligation she had to deal with. That's just it. I don't want this life anymore. Anger bubbled in my chest, pushing aside the fear and confusion. You mean you don't want me anymore? She didn't deny it. Instead, she pushed the papers toward me, her eyes cold and distant. I already spoke to a lawyer. The paperwork is ready. I'm offering you a clean split. I picked up the papers, my hands shaking as I skimmed through them. It was a standard divorce agreement, outlining the division of assets. But as I read further, I realized what she meant by clean split. She was offering me nothing. Not a dime from the lottery winnings, no share of our shared savings, no financial support. Just nothing. It was like she was trying to erase me from her life, to pretend that I had never existed. I felt sick, betrayed, and utterly devastated. You really think you can just cut me out of your life like this? Evelyn folded her arms, her expression unwavering. I don't need your permission, Mark. I already filed. I clenched my jaw, struggling to keep my anger in check. So that's it? You win the lottery, and suddenly I'm disposable? She shrugged, a casual, dismissive gesture that sent a wave of rage through me. I was going to leave eventually. The money just made it easier. I had never felt so betrayed in my life. I loved this woman. I had given her everything I had, my time, my energy, my support, and now, the second she had a way out, she didn't even hesitate to throw me away. I laughed bitterly, a hollow, empty sound. So what now? You just kick me out and live your rich dream life? Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Regret? No. It was more like annoyance. She was annoyed that I wasn't making this easy for her. I already bought a new condo, she said, not even trying to hide her smugness. I'm moving out tomorrow. My heart slammed against my ribs. Tomorrow? She nodded, confirming my worst fears. I hired movers. You should probably start packing too. I shook my head in disbelief, unable to process the speed with which my life was unraveling. You're unbelievable, she smiled, a cold, hard, and utterly unfamiliar smile. No, Mark, I'm just smart. I felt my fists clench at my sides, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She thought she had won. She thought she had everything figured out. But she had forgotten one very important detail. And soon enough, she was going to regret it. I barely slept that night. Evelyn had made up her mind, and there was no reasoning with her. The woman I had spent years loving had turned into a stranger overnight. A cold, calculating stranger who was willing to sacrifice everything, including our marriage, for a chance at a better life. But as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, something nagged at me, a tiny detail that had been buried deep in the recesses of my mind. Evelyn was acting too confident, too certain that she could just wipe me away like an old stain. And that's when it hit me. The prenup. Years ago, when we first got married, Evelyn had insisted we sign a prenuptial agreement. At the time, it didn't bother me. We were young, broke, and crazy in love. I didn't care about finances. I just wanted to spend my life with her. But Evelyn was insistent. She said it was just a formality, a way to protect both of us in case things went south. I remember her saying something about protecting her family's future, so I brushed it off as just that. I signed the document without even reading it, trusting that she had my best interests at heart. Now, years later, that little piece of paper could be my salvation. I didn't remember the specifics of the agreement, but I had a vague recollection of something about how assets acquired during the marriage would be divided. Could that include lottery winnings? I had no idea. The next morning, while Evelyn was out celebrating her newfound freedom with friends, I went digging. I knew we had a filing cabinet in the spare room where we kept all our important documents. It was a mess, overflowing with old tax returns, insurance policies, and various other papers we had accumulated over the years. I started rummaging through the files, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and desperation. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I knew that if there was any chance of salvaging this situation, it lay within those documents. After what felt like an eternity, I finally found it. A neatly stapled stack of legal documents tucked away beneath a pile of old receipts. The prenuptial agreement. I sat down at the desk, my hands trembling as I opened the file. The document was filled with legal jargon, but I skimmed through the pages, searching for anything that might be relevant. My heart pounded faster with each passing second. Then I found it. A single paragraph that changed everything. It stated that in the event of a divorce, any unexpected financial windfalls, such as lottery winnings, were to be considered joint marital property unless legally contested before the filing. Evelyn had already filed for divorce, which meant I was legally entitled to half of her winnings, half of $9 million. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly as the realization sank in. She thought she had won. She thought she had everything planned, but she had made one massive mistake. She forgot her own prenup. I barely slept that night. Evelyn had made up her mind, and there was no reasoning with her. The woman I had spent years loving had turned into a stranger overnight, a cold, calculating stranger who was willing to sacrifice everything, including our marriage, for a chance at a better life. But as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, something nagged at me, a tiny detail that had been buried deep in the recesses of my mind. Evelyn was acting too confident, too certain that she could just wipe me away like an old stain. And that's when it hit me. The prenup. Years ago, when we first got married, Evelyn had insisted we sign a prenuptial agreement. At the time, it didn't bother me. We were young, broke, and crazy in love. I didn't care about finances. I just wanted to spend my life with her. But Evelyn was insistent. She said it was just a formality, a way to protect both of us in case things went south. I remember her saying something about protecting her family's future, so I brushed it off as just that. I signed the document without even reading it, trusting that she had my best interests at heart. Now, years later, that little piece of paper could be my salvation. I didn't remember the specifics of the agreement, but I had a vague recollection of something about how assets acquired during the marriage would be divided. Could that include lottery winnings? I had no idea. The next morning, while Evelyn was out celebrating her newfound freedom with friends, I went digging. I knew we had a filing cabinet in the spare room where we kept all our important documents. It was a mess, overflowing with old tax returns, insurance policies, and various other papers we had accumulated over the years. I started rummaging through the files, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and desperation. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I knew that if there was any chance of salvaging this situation, it lay within those documents. After what felt like an eternity, I finally found it. A neatly stapled stack of legal documents, tucked away beneath a pile of old receipts. The prenuptial agreement. I sat down at the desk, my hands trembling as I opened the file. The document was filled with legal jargon, but I skimmed through the pages, searching for anything that might be relevant. My heart pounded faster with each passing second. Then I found it. A single paragraph that changed everything. It stated that in the event of a divorce, any unexpected financial windfalls, such as lottery winnings, were to be considered joint marital property unless legally contested before the filing. Evelyn had already filed for divorce, which meant I was legally entitled to half of her winnings, half of $9 million. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly as the realization sank in. She thought she had won. She thought she had everything planned, but she had made one massive mistake. She forgot her own prenup. When Evelyn returned later that evening, she barely acknowledged me as she strutted inside, a shopping bag from some high-end boutique dangling from her wrist. "Did you start packing yet?" she asked, setting her bag down on the kitchen counter. I stood there, arms crossed, a grim satisfaction building inside me. "Not yet." She rolled her eyes, the epitome of impatience. Mark, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I smirked, enjoying the moment. Oh, I don't think it's going to be hard at all. She frowned, her carefully constructed facade of indifference starting to crack. What's that supposed to mean? I pulled out the prenup from behind my back and placed it on the table, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Her eyes flicked down, and for the first time since this all started, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. What is this? She asked, her voice tight, barely a whisper. I tapped the relevant page with my finger, a smug grin spreading across my face. You remember this little document, right? The one you made me sign all those years ago? Her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and vulnerable. I leaned forward, relishing her discomfort. So, according to this, your lottery winnings are legally considered joint assets, unless you contested it before filing for divorce. Silence. Pure, deafening silence. Evelyn snatched the papers up, her hands shaking as she skimmed through them frantically. I watched her, savoring the moment. I saw the exact moment she found the clause. The exact moment the reality of her mistake crashed down on her. Her face paled even further. No, she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. This can't be right. I grinned, enjoying her panic. Oh, but it is. She slammed the papers down on the table, the sound sharp and jarring. That wasn't supposed to apply to the lottery. Well, maybe you should have read it more carefully, I said, shrugging nonchalantly. Evelyn's breathing turned shallow, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. You can't do this. Oh, I absolutely can, I said, crossing my arms, enjoying her misery. You were so eager to throw me out, Evelyn. But you forgot one small detail. You legally owe me half of that $9 million. Her eyes snapped up to meet mine, fury replacing her initial panic. This isn't fair, Mark. That money is mine. I bought the ticket, I picked the numbers. You had nothing to do with it. I leaned against the kitchen counter, keeping my voice calm and even, despite the storm raging inside me. You're right. I had nothing to do with the ticket. Just like I had nothing to do with your decision to blindside me with divorce papers. But the law doesn't care about what's fair. It cares about what's written in this contract. And by that logic, that money belongs to both of us. Evelyn let out a bitter laugh, pacing the room like a caged animal. This is insane! You were fine without my money for years. Why do you suddenly want it now? I raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. You mean, before you threw me out like garbage? Before you made it clear that you didn't care what happened to me as long as you got to live your new, upgraded life? Yeah, things were different before. Her nostrils flared, her eyes blazing with anger. You're a pathetic, greedy leech, I smirked, refusing to let her get under my skin. And you're a selfish, backstabbing liar. I guess we're even. Evelyn let out an exasperated sigh, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. There has to be a way around this. A loophole. Something. I chuckled, shaking my head. Oh, trust me, I already checked. And guess what? You have two choices. Either we go to court and the judge enforces this prenup as it is, which means I get my half, or we can settle this quietly and you give me what I'm owed without a messy legal battle. Her face twisted in frustration. You don't deserve a cent of that money, I shrugged, maintaining my cool demeanor. Well, legally, I do. She turned away, gripping the back of a chair, her knuckles white. I could see her mind racing, desperately searching for a way out. She had thought she had won. She thought she had rid herself of me without consequence. But now she was realizing she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and I wasn't going to let her forget it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she exhaled sharply, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine, she spat, whipping around to face me, her eyes narrowed with venom. You want my money? You get your damn money. But I swear to God, Mark, once this is over, I never want to see your face again. I smiled, satisfaction washing over me. That, Evelyn, is the first thing we've agreed on in a long time. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Evelyn sat stiffly at the dining table, her eyes darting between me and the prenup in her hand. She was trapped, cornered, and utterly furious. "So, Evelyn," I said, breaking the silence, "what's it going to be? Are we settling this like adults? Or do we take it to court?" Her nostrils flared, and she glared at me with unadulterated hatred. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" I shrugged, feigning modesty. "No, just prepared. Unlike you." She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I tilted my head, pretending to think about it. "Well, let's see. You blindsided me with divorce papers, kicked me out of my own house, and replaced me before I was even gone. So, oh yeah, I'd say watching you squirm is a nice little bonus." Evelyn slammed the prenup down on the table, her face contorted with rage. "You want half my money?" she hissed. "Fine! I'll give you half. But don't think for a second that you're going to walk away from this unscathed." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh? And what exactly are you planning, Evelyn? Going to hire a hitman? Smear my name in the press? Please, enlighten me." Her lips curled into a cruel, predatory smirk. "I have connections, Mark. You think a judge is going to side with you? I can drag this out for years. I have lawyers who will eat you alive. By the time we're done, you'll be lucky if you can afford a cup of coffee." I chuckled, shaking my head in amusement. "See, that's where you're wrong." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. A few taps later, I placed it on the table and pressed play. Evelyn's voice filled the room, clear and undeniable. "I don't care about Mark. I just want his name off the house so I can move Chris in. Let him think it's a mutual decision for now. But once the money's in my account, he's gone." Her own words, caught in crystal clear clarity. Evelyn's smirk disappeared, replaced by an expression of utter horror. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and her face drained of all color. "You," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I picked up my phone and stopped the recording, feigning innocence. "Oops," I said, shrugging. "I must have accidentally left my phone recording during one of your little conversations with your dear Chris." Her mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. That's illegal." "You can't." I leaned in, dropping my voice to a whisper. "Oh, but I can. And guess what, Evelyn? If we go to court, this recording becomes evidence. Evidence that you plotted to deceive me, that you manipulated me into signing over the house while already planning to replace me. And trust me, no judge is going to look kindly on that." Evelyn staggered back, as if she'd been physically struck. I smiled, enjoying her complete and utter discomfiture. "So, let's go over your real options, shall we?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing nervously. "One," I continued, holding up a finger, "you drag this through court, and I make sure this recording sees the light of day publicly. Which means not only do you risk losing everything, but your little perfect life with Chris." "Yeah, that crashes and burns too." Evelyn's breathing was shallow, her nails digging into her palms. "Or," I said, holding up a second finger, "option 2. You pay me what I'm owed, quietly. No lawsuits, no drawn-out battles. You transfer my share and we go our separate ways. No scandals, no mess." Evelyn's entire body tensed. I could see the gears turning in her head, desperately searching for a way out, some way to salvage her carefully constructed fantasy. "I hate you," she whispered, her voice filled with venom. I smirked. "That makes 2 of us." Silence stretched between us, the only sound the frantic beating of Evelyn's heart. Then, finally, through gritted teeth, she said the words I had been waiting for. "Fine." Evelyn sat stiffly at the dining table, her eyes darting between me and the phone in my hand. The room was tense, charged with the weight of everything that had just transpired. She knew she had been cornered. For the first time, I was the one holding all the power, and she absolutely hated it. "Fine," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, enjoying her discomfort. Fine what, Evelyn? Her nostrils flared and she glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. Fine. You'll get your money. I smirked. Now that's more like it. Evelyn's hands curled into fists, her knuckles white against the dark wood of the table. But I'm not giving you half. That's ridiculous! I tilted my head, feigning surprise. Is it? Because last I checked, your prenup, mind you, specifically stated that in the event of a divorce, the non-cheating spouse gets 50% of the other's winnings. She flinched, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. I had her. Evelyn sucked in a sharp breath and glared at me. You were never supposed to need it. Ah, so that was the truth, wasn't it? She had never thought that I would fight back. She had assumed I'd roll over, sign whatever papers she shoved in my face, and let her waltz off with everything while she played happy family with Chris. She never expected me to outmaneuver her. I tapped my fingers on the table, pretending to consider her unspoken plea. All right, Evelyn. I'm a reasonable man. Maybe we can come to a compromise. Her narrowed eyes tracked my every movement, wary and suspicious. What kind of compromise? Well, I said, leaning forward slightly, I could take half, which would be completely fair and legal. Or we settle for 40%, and I agree to keep that little recording to myself. Her breath hitched, and the color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and fragile. You're blackmailing me. I smiled, a cold, hard smile that mirrored the one she had given me just days before. Call it what you want. But let's be honest, Evelyn. You don't want this getting out. Evelyn's hands trembled, her carefully constructed mask of confidence crumbling around her. She knew I had her, and the realization was tearing her apart. 30%, she said, her voice barely audible. I shook my head, savoring her desperation. 40%, and I don't want any delays. I want the money transferred within 48 hours. Evelyn was shaking with rage now, her nails digging into the table surface hard enough that I half expected the wood to splinter. You are such a bastard. Maybe, I said, standing up, but I'm a bastard who's walking away with millions. You, on the other hand, are about to lose a whole lot more than just money. She glared at me, her mind still working overtime, probably trying to find a loophole, some way to still come out on top. But I knew she was out of moves. I had checkmated her. You have 24 hours to get the paperwork started, I said, grabbing my phone and heading for the door. Or the recording finds its way to some very interested parties. Evelyn let out a shaky breath, her eyes blazing with hatred. Get out. With pleasure, I said, turning to leave. But as I reached the doorway, I couldn't resist one final jab. Oh, and Evelyn? Tell Chris. I said hi. I didn't need to turn around to know she had thrown something at the wall in frustration. I could practically feel the heat radiating from her anger. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text message from Evelyn. The paperwork is being processed. You'll have your money in 48 hours. A smirk tugged at the corners of my lips. She knew she had lost. There were no more smug looks, no more gloating. She had played dirty, and now she was paying the price. I decided to celebrate early. I walked into my lawyer's office, grinning from ear to ear. You're a miracle worker, Mike, I said, shaking his hand. Mike chuckled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Nah, just good at my job. You gave me everything I needed, Mark. That recording was gold. She would have been a fool to fight it in court. I nodded, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The weight of Evelyn's betrayal had been lifted, replaced by a sense of vindication and a quiet sense of satisfaction. So what happens now? I asked. Mike leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Now? Now you wait. She'll pay up, because she knows the alternative is much worse. And then you move on. I left his office with a newfound sense of freedom washing over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't under Evelyn's control. I wasn't being manipulated or taken advantage of. I was free, and I wasn't the only one feeling the shift in power. Later that evening, I got a phone call from an unexpected source, Evelyn's parents. Her mother's voice was sharp and accusatory. "What did you do?" I raised an eyebrow, even though she couldn't see it. "Excuse me? You're ruining her life," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "She called us in tears, saying you blackmailed her for money." I chuckled, a humorless sound that echoed in the empty apartment. "Oh, so now she's the victim?" She cheated, lied, and tried to screw me over. I gave her a chance to walk away clean, and she didn't take it. So now she has to live with the consequences. There was silence on the other end of the line, broken only by the sound of her ragged breathing. Then, a quieter, more conciliatory voice came on the line. It was Evelyn's father. "Mark, son, we just don't want this to turn ugly." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "It's already ugly, Mr. Carter. Your daughter cheated on me, lied to me, and tried to steal everything I had. I gave her a chance to do the right thing, and she blew it. She made her bed. Now she has to lie in it." Another silence, this one heavy with disappointment. Then, a defeated sigh. "I see. Well, good luck to you." They hung up, leaving me feeling both vindicated and strangely empty. Typical. When Evelyn was on top, they cheered her on. But now that she was losing, suddenly it was unfair. I had no sympathy. They had enabled her behavior for years, and now they were reaping what they sowed. But just when I thought things were finally settling down, I got an even bigger surprise. A text message popped up from an unknown number. "Hey! We need to talk. It's about Evelyn." I frowned, trying to figure out who the hell this could be. Then I saw the name attached to the message. Chris. I grinned, a sense of anticipation building inside me. This was going to be good. I stared at my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. Chris? What the hell did he want? A part of me wanted to ignore him, let him deal with Evelyn's mess on his own. He had been complicit in her betrayal, a willing participant in her scheme to screw me over. He deserved whatever he was getting. But curiosity got the better of me. Chris had everything to lose right now. He had been Evelyn's little secret, the man she was willing to throw away her marriage for. And now, he was tangled in her downfall. Potentially, I grabbed my keys and headed out, the adrenaline already pumping through my veins. When I walked into the diner, Chris was already there, nervously stirring a cup of coffee. He looked like hell, dark circles under his eyes, disheveled clothes, a haunted expression on his face. He looked like a man on the verge of cracking. I slid into the booth across from him, my eyes fixed on his. "All right, talk," I said, my voice cold and devoid of any emotion. Chris sighed, rubbing his face wearily. "Look, man, I know I screwed up." I raised an eyebrow, a silent understatement of the year. He let out a humorless chuckle. "Yeah, but I need you to know I didn't know she was going to do you that dirty. The whole kicking you out, taking your money thing, that was all her." I folded my arms across my chest, unimpressed. "So, what do you want, Chris?" He exhaled sharply, his eyes darting around the diner as if he were afraid someone was listening. "She's broke," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I blinked, surprised by the bluntness of his statement. "What?" "She blew through most of the money already," he admitted, his voice filled with a mixture of shame and desperation. Bad investments, expensive vacations, luxury crap she didn't need. She thought the money would last forever, but now she's panicking. I leaned back in the booth, letting that sink in. Evelyn had $9 million, and she had already run into financial trouble. Karma was a bitch, and it seemed she was paying Evelyn a visit. Chris continued, his voice low and urgent. "She's looking for someone to blame. And now that you're taking your cut, she's spiraling. She's talking about taking you down any way she can." I smirked, unfazed. "Let her try." Chris shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "You don't get it, man. She's desperate. She's talking lawsuits, false accusations. Hell, she even mentioned hiring some guys to rough you up a little. My jaw clenched, my hands tightening into fists. Evelyn was more unhinged than I thought. This was escalating quickly. I narrowed my eyes at Chris, trying to gauge his sincerity. "And why are you telling me this?" He hesitated, then sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Because she's turning on me too." I almost laughed. The irony was too rich. "Didn't see that coming, did you?" Chris scowled, his face flushed with anger. "I thought she actually cared about me. But the moment things got tough, she started blaming me for everything, saying I was a distraction, that I led her astray." He ran a hand through his hair, looking miserable. "She's dangerous, man. You need to watch your back." I stared at him, weighing my options. Chris was a snake, a liar, and a cheat. But he was also in a bad position, caught in the crosshairs of Evelyn's unraveling scheme. Evelyn was clearly losing control, and if Chris was jumping ship, maybe, just maybe, he could be useful. I leaned forward, my voice low and intense. "So, what do you want, Chris?" He swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on mine. "A deal." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." Chris hesitated, then said, "I'll give you everything I have. Texts, emails, proof that she's scheming against you. In exchange, I want protection. If she goes down, I don't want to go down with her." I smirked, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "So you want an escape plan?" He nodded, his eyes pleading. "Yeah, that's it." I tapped my fingers on the table, considering the offer. Chris was still a backstabbing snake, but he was a snake with information. Valuable information that could potentially destroy Evelyn completely. And if Evelyn was really about to go nuclear, I was going to be ready. I leaned back in my seat, watching Chris fidget across from me. He was sweating, nervous, desperate. He was willing to do anything to save his own skin. "You really think she'd throw you under the bus?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Chris let out a bitter laugh, devoid of any humor. "She already has, man. She's telling her lawyer that I pressured her into spending so much, that I used her, that I'm the reason she's broke." He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "She's trying to pin her financial ruin on me." I smirked. "So now you want my help." He exhaled sharply, his eyes pleading. "Look, I know I don't deserve it. I screwed up. I went along with her lies. But I didn't expect this. And let's be real, Mark. You want to see her fall just as much as I do." He wasn't wrong. I wanted to see Evelyn pay for what she had done, for the way she had betrayed me, for the way she had tried to destroy my life. But I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "You said you had proof," I said, my voice hard. Chris pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages before sliding it across the table. "Right here. Texts, voice memos, even a video of her admitting she wanted to drain you dry before dumping you." I picked up the phone and scanned through the messages, my blood starting to boil. "I'll make sure he walks away with nothing. He'll be begging on the street when I'm done with him. He doesn't deserve a penny of this money. I did all the work. He was just some loser I kept around until I didn't need him anymore." I clenched my jaw, fighting back the anger that was threatening to consume me. I had known she was ruthless, but this was next-level evil. I played the video next. It was from a few weeks ago, before the divorce papers, before everything fell apart. Evelyn was sitting on the couch, sipping champagne, a smug smile playing on her lips. Chris's voice could be heard off-screen, asking her why she was dragging out the divorce. "Because I want to see him suffer," she said with a wicked grin. "He thinks he's getting a fair split? Please! I'll spend every last cent before I let him touch a dime." My blood ran cold. This was more than just greed. This was malice. Pure, unadulterated malice. Chris studied my face, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Believe me now?" I let out a slow, controlled breath, trying to regain my composure. "Yeah," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I do." He sighed, relief washing over his face. So, do we have a deal? I thought for a moment, weighing my options. Chris was still a backstabbing snake, but this was exactly what I needed to destroy Evelyn completely. I had the prenup, I had the recording of her conversation, and now, thanks to Chris, I had undeniable proof of her malicious intent. This was it. The final nail in Evelyn's coffin. I slid his phone back to him. "Send me everything," I said, my voice firm. Chris nodded, his eyes lighting up with hope. He tapped a few buttons on his phone, then hit the send button. My phone buzzed as the files came through, the notification tone echoing in the quiet diner. This was it. With the evidence Chris had sent me, I had everything I needed. Evelyn thought she had won. She had taken the money, the house, and my dignity. But she had forgotten one crucial thing. I knew her better than anyone, and I knew exactly how to bring her down. The day of the final divorce hearing arrived. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. It felt like the calm before a storm, a deceptive stillness before the inevitable explosion. Evelyn walked in with her expensive lawyer, her designer dress, and an air of arrogance that bordered on contempt. She barely even glanced at me, too busy whispering to her lawyer, her eyes cold and distant. She still thought she had this in the bag. She thought she could intimidate me, outsmart me, and walk away with everything. She was wrong. I sat calmly with my attorney, Mike, waiting for my moment. I knew what I had, the evidence I was about to unleash, and I was confident that it would be enough to turn the tide in my favor. The judge called the hearing to order, the gavel echoing in the silent courtroom. Evelyn's lawyer stood up, his voice smooth and confident. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Evelyn Parker, was the sole winner of the lottery. The funds are rightfully hers, and there is no legal obligation for her to split any of it with the petitioner." Evelyn smirked, crossing her arms, her eyes fixed on me with a triumphant gleam. She thought she had won, but she was about to learn just how wrong she was. My lawyer stood up, his voice measured and steady. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe that Mrs. Parker engaged in fraudulent and deceptive behavior regarding these funds. We would like to submit new evidence for the court's consideration." The judge arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "Proceed." I handed Mike a flash drive containing the texts, voice memos, and the damning video. He plugged it into the court's system, and the courtroom fell silent as the evidence began to play. First, the text messages flashed across the screen, each one a clear indication of Evelyn's malicious intent. Then, Evelyn's voice filled the room, her words dripping with venom. "I'll make sure he walks away with nothing. He'll be begging on the street when I'm done with him." Finally, the video played, Evelyn's smug face filling the screen as she confessed her plans. "I'll spend every last cent before I let him touch a dime." The judge's face darkened as he watched the evidence unfold. He turned to Evelyn's lawyer, his eyes narrowed. "Do you have any explanation for this?" Evelyn's lawyer paled, his confidence evaporating before my very eyes. "Your Honor, Enough," the judge interrupted, his voice sharp. He turned to Evelyn, his gaze piercing. "Mrs. Parker, this is damning evidence of malicious intent and financial misconduct. Not only will Mr. Parker be entitled to a fair share of the winnings, but your actions could be considered grounds for punitive damages." Evelyn's mouth opened and closed, her mind scrambling for a way out, some way to explain away the evidence that was now laid bare before the court. But there was no escape. The truth was out. But, she stammered, her voice barely audible. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice unwavering, "given the financial records submitted, it's clear that you and your partner, Mr. Chris Foster, engaged in reckless spending, depleting a significant portion of the winnings. You will be held solely responsible for these debts." Chris, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, turned white as a ghost. He looked like he was about to faint. Evelyn looked ready to pass out herself. Her face was ashen, her body trembling. She had lost. I sat back in my chair, a satisfied smirk playing on my face. I had won. In the end, Evelyn lost everything. The judge awarded me a fair portion of what was left of the lottery winnings, enough to start over and rebuild my life. She was left drowning in debt, her luxurious lifestyle shattered, her reputation ruined. Chris, predictably, tried to disappear, to distance himself from Evelyn and her mess. But it was too late. The damage was done. I heard that he and Evelyn had a massive falling out, each blaming the other for their downfall. Last I checked, they were both living in cheap apartments, struggling to make ends meet, and completely miserable. As for me, I walked out of that courtroom a free man, richer in ways that had nothing to do with money. I had faced betrayal, I had fought back, and I had emerged victorious. I had reclaimed my dignity, my self-respect, and my sense of worth. And when Evelyn called me weeks later, begging for help, saying she had nothing left, I let it go to voicemail because I was done with her, and it felt damn good. I used the money to start my own business, something I had always dreamed of doing but never thought possible. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to succeed. I worked hard, I learned from my mistakes, and I surrounded myself with good people. Years later, I'm happy to say that I'm doing well. My business is thriving, I have a loving girlfriend who supports me and appreciates me for who I am, and I finally feel like I'm living the life I was always meant to live. And every now and then, when I see a news story about Evelyn's latest financial troubles or legal woes, I can't help but smile, because I know that she got exactly what she deserved.